Good morning and a warm welcome from a very cold campus in Waverley. We're about to kick off with the Armata cybersecurity webinar on network detecting and defending against network threats and attacks. We are at our studio, which is in our Waverley campus, so I'm warmly dressed up. We are in the outside, but obviously very much, the rest of our delegates and audience, you're all online, and a warm welcome also to our panelists. So just some housekeeping. We will be posting 3 Slido poll questions. Greg, you're welcome to do that shortly. And towards the end of this webinar, we will then, having the delegates, the audience completed those Slido 3 questions, we will then share the results. And they're very much around the discussion points. I'd like to kick off with just introducing our esteemed panel. And starting with Mark Hamilton-Nell. He is a cybersecurity expert from Fortinet. Mark is a seasoned IT professional with over 20 years experience in software sales and solutions across many disciplines and industries in both B2B SME market as well as the highly challenging B2C sector. He's had senior management roles and led a range of sales and security teams in the last couple of years. And he really is deeply experienced in the world of network threats. And certainly from a Fortinet experience, we're looking forward to your contribution and guidance there. Mark, thank you very much for offering to be a panelist. Then Dr. Bright Gemeli Mawador. He's a cybersecurity lead at a Kenya-based organization called MARA, M-A-R-A. Bright has got 15 years cybersecurity experience across organizations in East and West Africa. He's very well known on the continent, and I've had the privilege on a number of fronts to see Bright in action, and particularly with his hackathons that he launched, the hackathon, which is, he's done multiple presentations across, engagements across the globe. He's been recognized as, a global advisory board of CTIA. He's, for example, top IT person in 2019, and he's been recognized as a mentor, top 40 under the 40 for 2016 up to 2021. His expertise is in cybercrime investigation, electronic evidence, blockchain, cybersecurity risk, and data science. So it's a warm welcome to Bright. We're really looking forward to your insights around the topic across the continent. Vishwas Nayi is with CyberQ Group in the UK as Chief Solutions Architect. Vish has experience of working with leading globally dispersed teams in cybersecurity, which spans red and blue teams and cybersecurity services, very much trading across Europe. And in my visits to the UK some years ago, I really had the privilege of interacting with, Vish's team in the CyberQ Group. So he's a trusted advisor and strong liaison between cyber and businesses, for both global enterprises and SMEs, and he has the ability to operate across all levels. As I said, he's the Chief Solutions Architect and previously was also the head of cyber security operations in the CyberQ Group. His competence covers ethical hacking and is a cybersecurity graduate from Coventry University, and also expertise in forensics. So we're looking forward to your contribution there, Avish, and thanks also for offering to participate. And lastly, Rishad Badaroon. He's an independent cybersecurity expert and former Qualys country manager for Africa and South Africa. Rishad has over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, and he's certainly well known in the last 8 years as the Qualys go-to representative for the continent. And he's also been in a very senior security operations role with a tier 1 life office based in Cape Town. And strong focus on security incident management, vulnerability management, and we're looking forward to your insights as well, Richard. So without further ado, I'd like to then kick into our agenda, which is the welcome and introductions, and I've done that. And hopefully, Greg, by now you're, oh, there we go. Thanks a lot. You've posted the poll, so feel free, please. We're looking forward to the contribution from the audience, and as if during our speakers, engagements and discussions, which is very much interactive, feel free to post questions. I will then spot a couple of questions and pose those questions that the audience has to the panel, because we want to make this as dynamic and real world as possible. We will then, once I've done one or two keynote address points, we will then go into up to 5 questions, which I'll be posing to the panel, and we will have a hard stop at 12 o'clock, and we will end off the last 5 minutes on what the poll results look like, the surveys. So without further ado, I'd like to then kick into my keynote address, and I think it's just to recap, the webinar topics is knowing high-risk network threats that we need to continuously detect and defend against. And that's a very important theme that we want to share some insights on. The next one is leveraging threat intelligence to keep informed on high-risk, high-impact networks. Whether you're a small business, a medium-sized business, or enterprise, whether you operate not only in South Africa, across East and West Africa, Europe, Dubai, America, Australia, it's all relevant. Knowing what those high-risk network threats are, knowing what threat intelligence we need to tap into to be reactive and proactive. And then if there are network threats and attacks, how do we respond? So responding to network security incidents, events and attacks, and protecting against those network threats and attacks, we're really going to get some insights. And of course, it's a snapshot. And certainly, follow-on engagement with anyone who wishes to chat to us or the panel, we welcome that. So this is something that I've really thought through over the years, and that is cybersecurity is an essential part of running a business in today's digital age. And that's about identifying and understanding the risks and the threats that your organizations may face. My name's Caesar Tonkin. I'm the moderator, and I think it's really important that bringing the panel that I have asked to participate is because in one shape or form, we've all interacted with one another. I've been at a local and a global chief information security role within various corporates. I've also headed up business units of service providers. So this is my third round in running a business unit or a division or a company. I'm the MD of Armata Cybersecurity, and I've been in the game for the last 13 years. So we really want to tap into, what is this all about? And it's critical. It's about staying in business and managing the risks and threats that our organizations may face. So on to that, I'd like to then pose the first question to cover the theme about understanding the threats. So I'm going to make a statement, then I'm going to ask the panel to answer or to give some insights into that. And that is, deep visibility into applications, users, and devices is necessary in order to defend enterprise networks against cyber threats. Compounding the visibility problem is that almost all internet traffic is now encrypted. Organizations may have unknown network blind spots as they shift from hub and spoke to distributed models such as SD-WAN with direct internet access at sites. Malicious actors can exploit these network gaps, hiding threats in encrypted traffic. So the question to Mark, which Bright and Richard can contribute to, is what are the typical security risks that you've seen and practical ways that you have seen or guided organizations to mitigate resultant network cyber threats? So Mark, if you'd like to kick off.
Thanks, Caesar, and yeah, thanks for having me at this webinar this morning. I think that the key thing that we've seen from our FortiGuard Labs, which is our Intel and Research division of Fortinet, is that there's been a really big growth in terms of ransomware and wipers. And this is from our cybersecurity threat report that was released this year, but looking in retrospect to Q3 and Q4 of 22. And we've seen that the volume is still growing in ransomware. There's been an increase of about 16%, but in ransomware and wipers. But when we look really closely at the quarterly breakdown, we saw that there was a massive growth of about 53% of those two ransomware and wipers in Q3 and Q4 of 2022. So what we've kind of put together is that right now it's key for organizations to have a very strong threat intel feed, but most predominantly is to use that feed to start looking at the pre-attack phase. So if we look at the attack kill chain, is to really start looking and doing reconnaissance and understanding what the threat actors are doing in the recon and the weaponization phase, because this approach is going to become the de facto for threat actors and cyber defenders, because they keep looking at different ways and different intelligence. There's no longer banging on the front door to get into an organization. They're using different components of the supply chain to use as an attack vector. So I think from a first perspective is to really, a lot of the people that we're talking to today have already got measures in place, whether it be on endpoint or network in place. But it's now the game is changing, and I think this is really off the back of coming out of the out of COVID and coming out of this new work from home environment. The expansion of SD-WAN is that the attack surface has expanded dramatically over the last 3 to 4 years.
That's really great insight there, Mark. Thanks. And it's good that you've highlighted some of the types of attacks, the ransomware, etc. Bright, would you like to weigh in there, please?
Yeah. So I mean, and I thank you very much for having me here, Caesar. Looking at the kind of attacks that we're having in networks and systems, and I think Marcus has highlighted on that, COVID or during the pandemic has brought a whole new way of working. A very focused point of view has been cloud. So centralized kind of cloud management has been a key enabler when it comes to SD-WAN being implemented in organizations. But we have seen a lot of attacks still happen because of one person being able to become the attack vector to get into networks and being exploited. A lot of cloud services are getting exploited so much because they're now exposed out there and becomes a gateway to be able to actually get into networks and systems. So looking at ways of having advanced malware detection, EDRs, being able to actually look at some of these, looking at cloud-based cloud access security brokers, as well as very secure web gateways, with much more visibility, which I think is something we'll get into much later. Having pure visibility of the network and systems will be great for intelligence. We have so much data that keeps on moving, but we don't know how to be able to harness that information and make sense of them, which I think is later in the conversations, we'll be looking at that when it comes to threat intelligence.
I think you've highlighted one thing that just keeps resonating with me, and that is, C-suite are looking for visibility, and they're looking for being able to say to their board, their exco, we're on top of our game. We understand what the business risks are that are translating them from cybersecurity risks, because business risk and cybersecurity risk are becoming more and more synonymous, and visibility is the emphasis. So we'll pick that up in a couple of follow-on questions. Rashad, your comments and guidance there, please.
Yeah, thank you, Caesar. I think the rise of ransomware has just, exponentially grew over the last year. And to second what Mark and Vic has been talking about, is the growth and the incidences has just increased, and the attacks are just going to quadruple in the coming years, and it's not going to go away. And I think a lot of organizations need to start figuring out how they're going to, in a more pragmatic way, and have these incident response teams for knowing what to do in a situation like that. So, just adding on that is just, saying that we have to have more resilience around this and know that this problem is not going to go away, and we need to actually do something about it. Um, especially within the manufacturing industry as well, in the OT environment. I mean, that is predominantly a huge rise in that. It's kind of silence at the moment, but there is an overlap from the IT and the OT environment. So it shouldn't be something that we shouldn't forget. And bridging that gap is quite important as well, from what I've seen over the last few years.
No, that's great. We will pick up another theme around shadow IT when we cover it under the external attack surface management as well, Richard. So thanks very much. So
Welcome.
moving on, it's this next statement I've got here, and that is we need to get to know which cyber criminal organizations and even nation states could target our organization. That's $1 million question, and it's about threat intelligence. And do we really know what our worst possible, in inverted commas, cyber risk day looks like? That's a scary question. And I think we need to go back into organizations and keep asking that question. How ready are we for having that worst day? What does that day look like? Are we able to respond? Are we able to stay in business and have business continuity? So that's a question I'm really going to pose to the panel, or ask the panel to keep coming back to from their experience. It's also about how do we protect our organizations from threats and attacks that could be material to staying in business. Cybersecurity is not just something that is an afterthought. It's not just about, oh, well, the IT security guys will take care of it. It's so material to being able to say we remain a going concern. We have an ability to respond and defend and stay in business and continue what we do with our customers and value chains and supply chain. And on that note, are we able to prevent cyber attacks and threats in our customers' supply chain? Because we are, in our organizations, relevant to our customer supply chain. And supply chain risk is becoming a hot topic. So from an Armata cybersecurity service offering, it's very critical that our SOC services, so security operations services, and closely linked to third-party risk management, particularly around supply chain risks, we are focusing in a big way on that one, just as a info. And lastly, cyber criminals automate how they weaponize and deploy their tactics, tools, and techniques. It's something that Bright was talking about, especially in organizations that have poor cybersecurity housekeeping. It's amazing. Typically, I've seen stats that 60 to 70% of ways in which threat actors compromise an organization is because the basics. They were using an old vulnerability known as the CVE, which was exploitable, and it was only because those organizations didn't patch against it. So on that note, my next question to the panel, starting with Mark and then Bright, is threat research is key to ensure cyber defense teams are more effective to defend against exploitable vulnerabilities. Real-world analysis of unprotected threat vectors becomes key. So, Mark, of all files analyzed in a secure malware sandbox by Fortinet, what percentage is malicious? How much of this, of those malware that have been analyzed to be malicious, how much has that increased over the last couple of years? And given that this is the real world element of what we do, what are some of the highlights of lessons learned at a global level from a Fortinet, and then Bright will weigh in. Thank you.
Sure, no problem, Caesar. Great question. So there's three components I'd like to touch on here. So right now, less than 1% of the total observed vulnerabilities that have been discovered in an enterprise-sized organization were on endpoints and were actively on attack. So this introduces what we like to call at Fortinet the red zone. This is really where this insight to a CISO should give them a clear view that if only 1% of those attacks on the endpoint, a direct attack, where are the rest of them coming from? And I think there's a couple of things here that we can add to this, is that I think it would be unwise to count out the old types of malware, wiper and botnet, that space. So things like Emotinet and Grand Crab, just to name some of those. So what the threat actors are doing is they're doing a lot of code reuse. It's basically old code that's been recompiled into a new variant, and then a new campaign is launched. And this threat never really dies. And we can see that with the increase just in ransomware and wipers at the end of last year. So the reality is, touching on your point as well, Caesar, if we have a look at what NIST has released recently, they're anticipating that by 2025, there'll be nearly 500 CVEs published a week. And right now, it's reported that the average organization has over 100,000 backlogged vulnerabilities. Now, that's massive. And if you then have a look at those, 25,000 of those CVEs published in the NVD were in 2022, and less than 2% of them are exploited by malicious actors. So that means, in my perspective, that right now, organizations really need to adopt a technology or a mindset as to how they're going to tackle this patching of vulnerabilities, because malicious actors are going to weaponize these vulnerabilities 40% faster than the defenders remediate them. And this is coming from NVD. So, if an organization, if they can only remediate less than half of their vulnerabilities, what are they going to plan to do differently for that management by 2025? And why is it failing? So the reality is we need to start looking at, EDR type products have got virtual patching built into it to compensate for this long patching cycle that the organizations go through to get there. So those would be my 3 comments on where we are in terms of the stage at the moment. Yes, we still have number 1 phishing attacks and insider threats, but I think we have a look at the SolarWinds episode and Log4j. The reality is that CVEs are really the bread and butter for threat actors.
Thanks there. Bright, your thoughts?
Mark, bros, I like when Mark speaks before I do, because he can amplify what I'm going to say. And Mark talked about something which is really sound to me which comes to vulnerability management. There are so many organizations that have thousands of vulnerabilities that can be exploited so easily to actually get it compromised. 2 weeks ago, I did an assessment of an organization, 14 branches, and the easiest way for us to actually compromise the network was because of the printers. The printers gave us passwords to everything in the organization. And that was so easy. We're like, wait, we didn't even compromise the Active Directory at that point to actually get passwords to be able to pass around. It was the printers that actually gave us that because of a simple vulnerability. Similar thing that we had a company that wanted us to test their security assessment, and we did it from a remote branch, which nobody ever thinks about, because they're protecting just the main branch, which is the headquarters. They forgot about all the other small ones to actually patch. So you see, from senior management perspective, they're focusing on just one big entity, but they're forgetting about the small ones. This is why we need to actually take vulnerability management into a very practical senses. We have to start moving from cybersecurity to cyber resilience, because if an organizations were able to actually do identification of all of these other branches and systems and solutions and learn how to recover very quickly, then they become resilient. When they are talking about cybersecurity, it's only about being able to protect, detect, and respond. But identification, protection, detect, response, and recover are the leading details for us to be able to become a little bit mature. And maturity levels differ. There are things, we have processes, matrices, and tools that have to be taken into consideration. Most organizations don't think about that. They think about only the tools, or think about only the how do you call it, the papers, the policies that have been generated. So we have to start classifying what is non-existent, what is the initial stage, what is the repeatable stage, a defined stage, a managed stage, or optimized in the various levels to start measuring as we go on. But vulnerability management needs to actually be a core front of our resilience processes. But identification of all of those systems and solutions or softwares that we have and how do we recover quickly will be a game changer.
I think it's a really good point, and I just want to tap into one thing. I'm going to ask Richard to comment. Most organizations battle with trying to remediate all vulnerabilities that have been detected, and that's not clever. You have to cherry pick, you have to pick your battles. So risk-based prioritization, your experience there, please, Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Caesar. I think just to add to what Bright and Marcus saying is that in a Qualys world, what they've done is the data that you receive is to look at the threat now, the intelligence of it, and how that is going to map back to the organization's risk profile. And what um, a lot of organizations are missing is that the time to remediate, because you've got a 30, 60-day, you either N-2, N-1 when it comes to patching, and you need a solution that from a Qualys perspective on their patch management was looking at zero touch, meaning when you had this Chrome bugs and patches that came out literally almost on a daily basis, the poor operational team couldn't keep up with it. And you need some kind of automation that's based on some kind of family that as a vulnerability comes in, you can automate that to say that, there's a zero touch to it. It automatically kicks off a job. It gets deployed. It gets sent out. And those are the critical things that actually where the operational team, the analysts, their time to start thinking using the information that they've received, they need to act quick on it. And if the data and the information and the threat intelligence that you have is not helpful enough, then it means it just increases that time. So, yes, seconding, I think vulnerability management is quite key. It's how you're going to get the data, and second is how you're going to remediate it, and that is where the time to remediate is the critical factor in that. And how you're taking and eating that big elephant is to look at the intelligence and then start building automation into that. And that releases the time for the analysts to actually focus on the more core things. Otherwise, you're being bogged down in this operational things, and everybody is, running around from desktop to desktop, and and yeah, it becomes quite a task. And I've seen this happen before. And worked with an organization, a very small organization, that they never had any kind of patching, and introduced a solution to them. And a year later, they've automated everything, and they realize how important that is. You don't have the manpower anymore to do this. So you need the solutions to actually help you in that.
So, Rashad, I want to call out yours and my experience in a particular manufacturing organization that was using SCCM to do patching, and they got onto an automated vulnerability detection and automated patching, and what a difference it made from a housekeeping and the ability to really remediate on the highest risk priority from a business perspective. And I think that's the important point. We have to go back into our organization and say, how do we drive a lot more effectiveness of what we do from a patching and remediation point of view, biggest bang for buck. And it's about business criticality, risk scoring, as opposed to, we want to patch for everything. So that just kind of summarizes what all three panelists are saying. So there is a wealth of threat reports from Fortinet and other vendors. It's always good if you do want to, have a look at what type of threat intelligence, open source, commercial threat feeds. We're welcome to post it in as a follow-on email to you if you want to know. But certainly on the slide, there's the Fortinet Global Threat Landscape Report of February 2023. And it's always really useful to get the likes of the Fortinet threat map to see dynamically, real time, who's trying to hack who. It's always fascinating. You always think it's certain countries trying to hack. No, everyone's trying to hack everyone. I mean, that's the bottom line. Yeah, it's really fascinating. So my next question.
If I can touch on that quickly.
Thanks, Mark.
That Fortinet threat map is really powerful in the fact that you can actually just isolate down the severity of the threat, the type of threat in real time, where it's coming from, where it's going to. Because to your point, it's just I'm going to throw 3 stats out here just to give the audience an idea of what is being processed from a Fortinet perspective, and I'm sure the other threat research labs are the same. But basically, if we just look at botnet and CNC attempts, 41.2 million attempts are thwarted every minute by using Fortinet. I mean, just try and comprehend that. It's insane. Or 17.3 million spam mails are blocked per day. That's something that we can discuss at another thing. But if you have a look at 0-day attacks, 997 are discovered per day. So these stats, when you start looking at, means that we've got to, and Richard touched on this, we've got to start looking towards automation to help remediate this basic onslaught that is coming from the threat acting society, for the lack of a better word.
No, thanks, Mark. It's what keeps us awake as security practitioners, and we really need to be mindful that, you know, it's a case of we need to have the basics in place, and even advanced cybersecurity such as Security Operations Center, a really automated vulnerability management operations process. But even if you've got those things in place, if you are attacked, how do you respond and stay in business is the message. On to my next question. This is going to be directed at Bright and then Mark. These are the major cyber attack types: ransomware, malware, DDoS attacks, phishing, social engineering attacks, man-in-the-middle attacks, fileless attacks, and the list goes on, which the speakers have been talking about. From a defense in-depth perspective, which are the most effective cyber attack prevention controls and solutions amongst these? And they include, but they're not exhausted list, web application firewall, DDoS protection, bot protection, cloud security, database security, API security, threat intelligence, next-gen firewalls. So, Bright, give us some of your real-world experiences of how organizations are using any one of these protection solutions to detect and defend against threats and attacks.
So I would say, I mean, all the things that you've mentioned right now, it varies from company to company depending on exactly how they are structured. We're looking at ways of being able to discover. We need to understand attacks, evaluate the risks that are there before we're able to actually know how to respond. Threat intelligence comes at a time whereby it becomes the main key focus of being able to know exactly how do I able to understand my network, my systems, my applications, all the logs that have been collected. They've been collected and doing triage, being able to understand the matrices that are there before you even know how to automatically respond. We've seen a lot of SOARs that have been coming into place right now, and SOARs are now plugging into a lot of security incident and event management tools. So they're able to do the triage investigation and being able to do the preventive measures that we don't start calling too many people when it comes on attack chain to prevent an attack. You've been hit by a phishing attack. You want to take that phishing attack and understand the files that have been attached to it. You want to understand exactly what are the indicators of compromise. Is the file malicious? Has the file been clicked already? Is the process running? Is the process running double or triple times? Is it a fileless malware? All of that will take so much time for a human being to be able to investigate properly, even when they see that on a SIM, to be able to actually understand the extent of this attack. This is where a lot of automation comes in. That's where intelligence comes in. We have next generation firewalls. Hackers are able to bypass that. I have been able to bypass a few of them. We have web application firewalls. I have been able to bypass next generation firewalls. I have seen fileless malwares that have been created because I have created a few of them myself. We're looking at, we're moving away from executable files to DLL files, for example. We're looking at a way of being able to actually launch kind of malwares on network or systems without necessarily using system applications. There will always be a new way of being able to do that. But if we can't consolidate all of those with intelligence and make better decisions, informed decisions, then we're going to have a very difficult time in being able to stop all of this. So from a defense in-depth perspective, understanding our environment, being able to know how can we discover all the details and data that we have to collect, being able to understand it in terms of being able to prioritize the risks, and then we can know how to actually respond to them. So yes, it's great to have DDoS protection. It will stop a number of attacks. Mark has given a very good perspective of the number of attacks that are coming. These are millions. I really tried to, when it told me to actually visualize that in mind, I was like, okay, I can't really think of how many are actually people are being hit right now. And they're automated tools which hackers are using. We have to understand that. If they are automated, we have to automate as well. So from my perspective, having all of these tools would be great, but if we can't get all of them to have any kind of intelligence, we will not be able to actually stop most of these attacks. Social engineering will always be there. I mean, it's getting easier by the day. Just yesterday, I was playing around with I think you've all seen this new tool, this Flipper Zero. I bought a Flipper Zero, and the things I'm able to do already with Flipper Zero, trying to, signal attacks, being able to do bad USB. I was able to control TVs. I even cloned a debit card yesterday, an RFID tag somewhere with just this little device here. It's getting crazier. So I think that's where we need to start talking about zero trust. And I think with that conversation will come very soon. So the attacks will come from different perspectives. Collecting data, having intelligence, making informed decisions will be the way to go.
Thanks very much. If you've just to pick up on one of the points, that adversaries are very much focused on speed and volume to maximize their profits. So they're using tools that our red team, offensive red teams are using in our organizations to see,
Yep.
and Cobalt Strike is an example.
Yeah.
It's a good tool. It's part of the tools of trade that red teams use, and yet adversaries are using commercial tools like that to our disadvantage. And that's scary because they realize, oh, no, 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 why go and build something when there's already something that is well used by acceptable red teams as part of our offensive security in our organization. So
Yeah.
you're really highlighting an important point there.
There's something which happened about a week or two ago. One of the threat actors, one of our researchers released a link. I have to look for that link and share. He was able to share that link, which was which gave a GitHub repository of all the tools other hackers are using, right? And guess what? It's the same tools we use for our red team exercises. They're not really reinventing the wheel, and hackers will only go for the easiest method to attack.
Yep.
If you go to Shodan right now, Shodan.io, and you look for, say, port 445 and look for, put in bracket, authentication disabled, put the country, ZA, KE, or whatever it is, look at the number of ERPs that are online, which will take you not more than 10 seconds for you to compromise. Anybody online, try that out. Authentication disabled, put in quotes, put port 445 and put the country, whichever country that you want to. You'll see shares of details, and that's what they go for, the easiest word, the easiest ones to actually compromise. Ransomwares are moving from locking machines and telling you to pay to compromising your system and extracting files from your systems and telling you pay for it, otherwise we are going to release them. That's what has happened in a few times in Kenya that I've seen the past few days. And ransomware groups are even getting on the Gartner chart. Can you imagine? We're moving from products to ransomware groups getting to be rated worldwide as how good they are, and they're about to get worse. Yeah.
Yep. Cybercrime as a service is big business.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next question for the sake of time. Uh, Before I do that, the next slide really emphasizes that cybersecurity priorities must be relevant to our actual business priorities. I keep saying this. And we must adopt a risk-based approach to reacting to and defending against cyber attacks. We can't boil the ocean is the usual statement. So the question I have now for Richard, and that is about SQL injection vulnerabilities. Would you like to give us some of your thoughts? And the question is, what are the practical ways to mitigate against web-based vulnerabilities? And what's your experience there, Richard?
Yeah, thank you. What we've experienced in the Qualys world around the web application scanning was the huge uptake of doing scanning in the web application environments, and we're finding a lot of these attacks occurring is coming from systems that's been overlooked. The common web application vulnerabilities, they're not even testing the web apps on the top 10 vulnerabilities from the OS. They've got some servers that sitting in a corner that they don't even remember, or that system is so old they're too scared to even touch that web server, and even trying to patch them because they don't know what the effects are because it was built 30 years ago. And also the unsecured web assets, and these are predominantly some of the attacks and hackers are going for. So the strategies that was built around where, from a Qualys perspective and its industry basis, now to look at how are you going to actually start fixing those applications, and using the external attack surface from what Qualys was using was to build that inventory of those web assets, start understanding what that inventory is like on from a web application side. Then how are you going to prioritize the critical services from those web apps, and then also remove the vulnerability. So the remediation is, one thing is getting the data, understanding what the web apps are, and secondly is to then start remediating that. And I think where the beginnings of any application starts in the software lifecycle development of that application. And when you start doing that from the beginning, you already start building a good an application where it's going through the test, it gets scanned, the guys fix the code, and by then, hopefully, when you go into production, you've reduced that attack surface on that. And this is what we're seeing the adoption now, where we've had one customer, purchase almost 300 licenses for web applications. That's how increasing their services has become. So, they can see the importance of that. And as Byte was mentioning, you've got this external facing service, and the attackers are just using the same tools to actually find out where the holes are. And if you're not fast enough to fix that, they're going to be ahead of you. And this is where the automation, and I think starting this from the beginning of that cycle is key. And then also legacy systems is to now see and adopt what you're going to do with regards to that. And I think from from what I've also seen is that one also has to look at the end of life and end of service of those web services too, because it's not supported anymore. And guess what? They're going to go for that. And if you haven't had any kind of remediation plans as to how you're going to mitigate that, because no one is supporting it anymore, is to either migrate it or move over to new software, then you got a problem. And I think where as Mark said, there's a lot of technologies that's out there, be it a web application firewall that at least sits in front of that application, and where you can do digital patching to at least give you the time to start remediating your applications. So there's a lot of technologies out there that can do it. And I think ultimately you have to decide how quick you want to protect yourself and what are the methodologies you're going to use to apply those controls to that.
So let me just throw another question. This is going to be to yourself, Rashad, and to Vish, and that is external. It's the last question, and this is the toughest question. External attack surface management is where organizations are alerted on unmanaged, unknown assets found on the internet and how an attacker can compromise an organization. Unsanctioned exposed services such as RDP, which is internet on internet-facing systems, ports that are open, SSL certificates that are out of date, application stack vulnerabilities discovered, and enumerated assets. So the question is, how should we prioritize high risks that we need to mitigate against cyber threats that could result from inadequate security on internet-facing systems? That's a really critical question, is because too often we don't know what we don't know of what an adversary can find on internet-facing systems, because we think, well, it's not really important to us. We only worry about really internal systems. Okay, so first to Rashad and then to Vish.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I think that's a topic that a lot of it's kind of an unknown topic, and it's quite a topical discussion as well. External attack, as Bright and Martin is using the Shodan. So in the Qualys world is looking at the EASM and in mapping that together with your vulnerability management, and looking at your asset, what they call your asset inventory which is now looking at your end of life and end of support. And that was when the launch of this came a year ago. It surprised me that the asset management part of it used to be out of IT. It used to sit with another division, and nobody knew about it. And then they used to do the updates of that software. And then when it got pulled into the cybersecurity areas as well as done, now suddenly you're seeing that you've got all the software, unauthorized software, end of life um, devices, and now you're needing to you're fortifying the whole thing, your whole environment, be it internal or externally. But then what happens is that you're not even looking at the software or the hardware that has come to end of life and end of support. And guess what? That's where the attackers are going to go first, because they know that you can't patch those stuff. So they're going to go for the crown jewels, which is you've got legacy systems that are sitting there for the last 10 years. It's end of life and end of support, and the vendors are not doing anything. And what are you going to do about it? And you don't even know about it. And this is where those major challenges are coming in. What I've seen speaking to a lot of organizations and doing the implementation of this was, we're going to do the vulnerabilities and all sorts of technologies that we're throwing in it, and we're doing all sorts of policies and controls, and then we show them that, guess what, guys, do you know that the software and these devices is end of support since 2017? And I remember speaking to a client, and the guy goes, I've got a serious problem here. And you could really see he was really now concerned, because I didn't even know about this. And I'm saying, well, this is why we need to highlight, not to the organization, but to the industry, to say that your software and end of life is actually where you should be starting looking at, where you're fixing your first things. Because yes, you can patch everything else because the vendors has launched patches and you can automate it, but what I've seen is that there has been no focus on that specific area. And suddenly when you show them this, they're going like, hang on guys, we know that is a manual process that's running in the background, but we need to start looking at this. And when this reaches the board, to say that, guys, or the risk forums, they're going like, well, we've got 30 applications and hardware devices that's actually end of life, and they're going, well, what do we need to do? It means now we need to spend more money, and when it comes to spending more money, it's going like, I don't have that money, and then you have to start quantifying the risk to it. Anyway, that's what I've seen as quite a critical thing in the EASM world.
Thanks, then, Richard.
Sure you.
Vish, your guidance there?
Yeah, so I think, Bright, Mark, and Rashad have covered on a lot of things, and I'm essentially going to build on that. It all starts with the visibility, and I think Shodan is, a place especially for internet exposed stuff. Start there. You don't need to do anything clever. Put in your addresses, and you will see what the hackers see. Visibility is the starting point, because if you don't know what you're defending, then you can't start on that journey. So get that level of visibility. But then I think one of the questions that got covered was, I only have finite resource and budget, right? People power and money power can only, there's only so much. And it was a question I got asked in a board meeting yesterday, and it's like, how do I prioritize what I fix or what I target, because I only got so much time? And there's a couple of ways to do it, right? It's kind of, if you've got a risk register, that is going to come in useful, because you can look at, what is the criticality of that asset. If it was either taken down, can your business function for 24, 48, 7 days? If that asset was down, to the service it's providing your client and suppliers, what kind of data is residing on that asset? What would it mean? And especially, if you come under any kind of compliance requirements, will that have an impact? Because then you're kind of going into the whole legal, finance, and reputational damage. And, to prioritize those things against some of the other things. I know everything is important, but, especially kind of looking at that compliance requirement is going to be something that, could be a nice starting point. And again, just to kind of take this back, a lot of organizations have a lot of tools and things like that, but kind of, I think Bright will agree, when we do things like web app pen testing and external infrastructure pen testing, we're coming across, OWASP top 10, and, kind of having, DevOps is great, but DevOps, SecOps, where you're kind of implementing, dynamic code review, kind of, checking against the top 10, build security from the get-go. It's gonna, prevention is better than, the kind of cure mentality. So building in security from the get-go will save you a lot of pain points later on into the future. So I think, just to highlight, kind of if you need to prioritize something that's already out there, kind of look at, how long can you function without it? That's going to give you a starting point, or what comes under your compliance. And then again, I think, businesses need to change that mentality. It is a business thing, not an IT thing. And, being secure from the get-go, from when you start to build something as a product for your clientele, is going to serve you better in the long term.
Oh, thanks for keeping us honest there, especially about prioritizing and what really do you need to focus on to stay in business. Again, the same theme. So we've got 5 minutes left. I just want to go to the polls, and thanks for those who did participate. And we've got 3 questions, but if you still want to respond to the last 2 questions, feel free to do now. So I'm going to present the first one, and that is, come on. I'm going to show it here. Our organization is most concerned about these high-risk network threats and attack vectors. And the options were zero-day exploits, malware attacks, network segmentation risks, DDoS attacks, and none as yet. So the winners, zero-day and malware attacks, then network segmentation. I am not surprised, although I would have thought DDoS attacks would have been higher. But this audience, amongst 270 odd, that's of the 32 people who participated, and that's interesting. Next one. Our organization uses these threat intelligence methods to keep informed on threats and indicators of attack. One is commercial threat feeds, and the other one is open source threat intelligence feeds. And it seems the majority of the 26 who did participate we use commercial threat feeds. I think that's also a bit of a surprise because it costs, and generally organizations would, ingesting threat feeds into the SIEM and the SOAR as part of the SOC service. So generally, you start with open threat intelligence feeds just for cost reasons, but it's good. There's really good and not too expensive commercial threat feeds as well. The last question. This is about the response handling to network threats. Our organization responds to network security incidents, events, and attacks using these methods, utilizing security incident and event management, SIEM solutions for real-time detection response as part of a SOC service, or we follow an established security incident response plan and procedure, or we engage in a dedicated incident response team, or none as yet, or we do forensic analysis and investigation. So the winners are using a SIEM as part of a SOC service, and we follow an established security incident response plan and procedure. And as well as the other one is, so there's a co-second, and that's engaged in a dedicated security incident response team as part of a SOC service. So it's good to know of the 29 respondents that we really are saying to detect and defend against network threats and attacks, you really have to have a SIEM, SOAR, and a SOC service. So let me go back to the slides. Oops. All right. So by weaving cybersecurity into the everyday fabric of our organizations, we will be better placed to mitigate risks appropriately and effectively. That's the common theme. And I love what this CEO of Bulletproof, it's a statement that's really resonated with me. Just to highlight, from an Armata point of view, to conclude, this is the cybersecurity portfolio. It's from cybersecurity consulting to managed security operations to advanced cyber defense services. So we very much welcome, if you want to have a further engagement with us and our sales team and our delivery team, we welcome showcase into what we do. But certainly a warm thank you to our panelists. You've been incredibly well prepared, and the dynamic questions that we threw at you even today just shows that there's a wealth of experience locally and globally, and taking time out of your diary is really appreciated. And certainly to the audience, we thank you for joining us on this in this great event, and it will be made available. A marketing team will send out a follow-on with you, and certainly as well as the video link to this. So on that note, we wish you farewell, and thank you very much for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Cheers. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you.